podcast, we will be discussing sensitive topics such as sexual assault. It's important to take care of yourself while listening. Some suggestions are listening while you're in a healthy headspace or knowing who you can reach out to if you become upset. Our 24/7 helpline for crisis calls based out of Central Florida is 407-500-HEAL. For the Florida State Sexual Helpline, call 888-956-7273. By contacting the national hotline at 1-800-656-4673, you can get support and learn about your local resources. There is always someone ready to help. Hello and welcome to the Victim Service Center, or VSC Healing Begins Here podcast series. The Victim Service Center is a nonprofit organization that provides free, individualized counseling and other services to survivors of any kind of trauma in Central Florida. Today, we will be talking about how to regain control and empower yourself after a sexual assault. With me today, I have Tracy Kelly, who is a sexual assault survivor, and she is here to share how she was able to take back her power from this traumatic situation. Welcome, and thank you for being here, Tracy.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I do want to start off by asking you, Tracy, can you please share a little bit more about your story?
Absolutely. Yes. So I am a survivor of child sexual abuse. I was abused from the ages of 9 to 11 by a family member. And the abuse happened in my own home, and the abuse happened also when my parents were around, and it happened several times over the course of those 2 years. I decided not to disclose my abuse, and I decided to keep it as a secret because basically when I was 9, I knew the things that we had done and we were doing were wrong. But I grew up in a household, in a very Southern household, where you didn't do things that you knew were wrong, and if you did something that was wrong, you knew the consequences. You knew you were going to get punished. And unfortunately, during this time, many years ago, when this occurred, these topics weren't discussed then, and they weren't openly discussed, and my parents didn't sit me down and discuss these things and what to do if something were to happen. And so I felt very shameful, I felt very guilty, I felt very afraid, I felt, just terrified, and I felt very dirty that all of these things were happening to me, and I didn't know what to do. And I didn't want to tell because my abuser decided, he told me a lot of times that if I went to somebody and told them what was going on, that we would get in trouble. And so he really kind of put the blame on me, that it was my fault as well. And so I had a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. And so I thought what I did was wrong and it was my fault. And I didn't disclose what happened to me. I didn't have that relationship with my parents to be able to kind of talk through these things with them. So I held on to everything that had happened to me, and I just kind of bottled it all down. And over the years, I just really just shoved those emotions, those feelings down, and it caused a lot of problems, a lot of grief over my adolescence, going into puberty and things like that, and even with lots of relationships that I was trying to form at the time. I just felt like I was a dirty person, that there was something wrong with me, that I had done these horrible things, that nobody would love me, nobody would care about me if they knew what I had done. And so I hid these things, and it really hurt me. I really struggled with anxiety. I struggled with depression, just not feeling good about who I was, not feeling confident with the person I was, and just really feeling like I didn't deserve anybody to treat me well. That I did this horrible thing. I felt so much guilt and shame that I did this horrible thing, that I should be punished. So I never really disclosed. And because of that, like I said, I had to deal with a lot of anxiety. I had to deal with a lot of depression. I began drinking at a young age. I began using drinking as kind of hiding the anxiety that I was feeling, I remember just drinking that early age and feeling like that, getting to that point where it kind of numbed those feelings, those pain I was feeling, and that was the first time I could be able to do that. So I began drinking more and more, and just to hide, I just felt like that was like a shield for me. I could hide who I truly was. And so I got into really bad relationships because I would choose the guys that I thought would treat me poorly, the way I thought I should be treated, instead of treating me the way that you should treat somebody. And I was almost like punishing myself by getting into these horrible relationships. And I ended up getting into a relationship with a guy who was an alcoholic, and he was very abusive and verbally, physically abusive towards me. And it came to a point when I was about 21 where being in a relationship with this guy who had singled me from my friends and my family, and I disclosed to him my abuse and what happened to me. And instead of being supportive of me, he kind of threw it in my face and would tell me when he would get drunk that it was my fault that it happened. And so here I'm hearing another guy, another person who says they love me, you know, attacking me. And it really kind of hurt and messed with me. And I just didn't really understand how to deal with all of these things. So at 21, I was drinking a lot and just really in a bad place. And I attempted suicide for the first time, and just remember I just feeling like I didn't want to die, but I didn't know how to deal with all of this. And that is when my parents found out about the abuse. And it was a really hard struggle for them to kind of figure out how to deal with all of that, the trauma that I had gone through. And you know, at this point, our families were still connected. You know, my family member that abused me, he was a cousin, and we were still all very connected, and we were still all together, and I was still made to be around him even after I disclosed the abuse, which made me feel even more like I don't deserve to be loved. I don't deserve to have somebody take care of me, and that it just kind of proved to me even more that it was my fault and that I should just get over all of these things, all of these feelings that I'm having. And that was a really hard time for me. And it really wasn't until I, met my husband, and he showed me really kind of true love and sympathy. And I remember telling him my story, and he had so much sympathy for me and just said, it wasn't your fault, and I believe you, and I still love you. And that was the first time anybody had kind of said that to me. And then when I had my boys, my kids, that was really the first time that I felt that I deserved to be loved, and that these two people, these two little babies that I had, were just going to be the light of my life. And they're really what saved me from, I kind of felt that unconditional love, and I felt my purpose in life at that point was to be with these babies and to help these babies. So that's
Tracy, thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Your story, it makes me so emotional because at 9 is when you were sexually abused, and then you decided to tell your story 12 years later. And when you did tell your story, your boyfriend at the time, he victim blamed you, and he did not support you. He did not make you feel validated. And like you said, I can't imagine how much you felt and how much pain you were going through. So during your healing journey, through this process, you met your husband, you have 2 beautiful boys. What did your journey look like in reconnecting with yourself and reconnecting back with your emotions?
It was a long journey. It took a very long time to get to this place and to get to where I feel like I didn't blame myself. I always had that hard time saying it wasn't my fault. And it took a very long time. And it really wasn't until after I had my kids and I looked at them and I said, I want to be a better mom for them. I want to be a better person for these babies. I want to protect these kids. And I decided to go to therapy because I felt like my kids deserved the best of me, and I wanted to give them that. And starting to work with a therapist, starting to kind of go through things that had happened to me, it was a very hard process of being able to get to that point where I would say it wasn't my fault. And it honestly really wasn't until my oldest son got to be 9. And I looked at him at 9 and thought, that was me when it happened. There was no way I could have ever done anything to stop this or prevented this. And knowing that a 9-year-old kid, they can't process anything that goes on. And so it really took that time of seeing my kids to get to that age for me to realize how traumatic everything was and how it really wasn't my fault. And just being able to see the innocence through my kids really helped me kind of understand of like, that was a very traumatic experience. So it took a very long time, and it really wasn't until I started sharing my story, probably a few, like 5 or 6 years ago, that I started being like, I'm a survivor, I'm not a victim anymore. So it took a long time, but I think it was more my kids just seeing the innocence in them.
What has been the most impactful part of your journey so far?
I think the most impactful part of my journey is, I think there's two things. So I'd have to say, one thing is when I share my story, which I do love to share my story now, is because when I speak and I look into the audience and I see that one or two people who I can relate to and who we lock eyes and I know that they've been through something similar, and I can see them kind of feeling the same things that I had felt. And knowing that me speaking out saying all of the things that you're feeling is valid. Everything you're feeling is okay. You can be sad, you can be mad, you can be scared and angry, and all of these things, guilt and shame, they're all okay feelings to have, and that you're okay to have that feeling, and that there is going to be a light at the other side. Like there is going to be another side where you feel like you're better, like you're getting better. And, sometimes they'll come up to me and be like, something happened to me and your story really helped me feel like I'm not the only person. And I think that's the biggest thing, is helping people understand that they're not the only one, that they're not the only ones that are feeling this or had to go through that, and that there is going to be positive at the end. Like it's not all going to be negative. You can make it a positive. And then also seeing my kids and knowing that I'm raising my kids, talking to them, having that open communication, talking about mental health, talking about struggles, talking about traumatic experiences with them, that hopefully they'll be able to be the next generation that'll openly communicate with this.
Tracy, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's beautiful to see that you've regained power, you've taken back control, and you are living such a beautiful life. And your sons, your children, they're a testament to that.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Of course. It is so beautiful and amazing to see and understand what Tracy's healing journey has been like and how she's taken her power back. When we return, we will be joined by Gail Gardner, who is also a sexual assault survivor. So don't go away. Welcome back to the VSC Healing Begins Here podcast series. In this next segment, we are joined by Gail Gardner, who is a sexual assault survivor, and she is here to share how she was able to take back her power from this traumatic situation. Welcome and thank you for being here, Gail.
Thank you for having me.
Gail, can we first start off, can you please share with us a little more about your story?
Well, back in 1988, I was sexually assaulted. I came home from a church event, and my son at that time, the youngest child, was 9 years old. And it was just him and I. The other children had grown and gone off. And so we were spending that evening out, and we came home and we went to bed. There's more other things that were going on, but we went to bed when we got in. It was late. And the next thing I knew, I was attacked. And so as time went on, that night, matter of fact, I was a little fearful for him and I, but I went next door to my neighbor and called the police from there. And when they came, they took a rape kit. They took me to the hospital, really, but they took information from me, and they took a rape kit when I went there to the hospital. For years, I always wanted to know what happened to the evidence that they took out of the room, the sheets, the quilt, which belonged to my great aunt. And a couple of times I would call, but the only thing I was looking for was were the items. And what happened was they always knew who I was, but nobody offered any information about the rape kit or about if they ever caught this guy. So years went on. I went to finish college. I was a single parent, and I finished and began to teach in the public school system in Orange County. Stayed and got a couple of more degrees and just lived my life. And right there, never heard anything. It was not until from 1988 until 2016, I could not sleep in the dark. And at that point, I remember when I moved into another location and I was able to sleep in the dark, it was because I just made up my mind I was going to sleep in the dark. I felt safe at that time. But before then, I would be up in the middle of the night looking out through the blinds. Could not sleep in the house with the lights or the least sound I would hear would disturb me. And so years went on until finally I retired from education, and I was doing some pastoral counseling with some women who also had been sexually assaulted, but I had not been through a process of counseling. I went to a counselor one time, and there was not enough back then there was no victim service center, and there was no other avenues for me. The one avenue they had, I was very disappointed in it. And so one day I was driving from an event and decided to stop by the police department to get a copy of my records. I had written a book and I wanted to put together a video or another book for memoirs for my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren. And when I walked in the police station and asked for the records, the woman behind the counter said, well, let me see if I can get somebody down here for you. Because I told her, she said, when was the case? I said, I think it was April 30th, 1989. Not remembering it was not those dates, and that's very common for sexual assault survivors, and not remembering things. And so a gentleman came down, it was a cold case detective, and he had the right dates, April 29th, 1988. And I said, well, do you mind if we look into this? And I said, no, I don't mind at all. I still don't know what's going on because I had no idea where this gentleman was, if I can use that term. And I just knew things were going to happen that maybe I wouldn't be comfortable with. I got in my car, and the police department was closing, and I was sitting in my car. People were going home. Ladies were walking out with their purses that I had just seen behind the counter. But I was in such shock. I'm like, what just happened in there? Well, it was still a cold case. My kid was still there at the police department. And I it kind of shocked me more than anything. I was in a daze for a while because I'm like, what is going on? And come to find out that he's been in prison since 1992, I think they told it. And in 2012, he was due to come out of prison, and someone decided that they didn't want him out of prison, wanted to see he had attacked someone else. And so he's still in prison. He has, as I understand, 2 life sentences. He has raped over 150 people. Wow. And that's where our case is right now. But I had gone through life not knowing that uncertainty, and that was the worst of it, because I would always be looking over my shoulder, so to speak, and living in fear. With my son, who when he grew up and was a grown man, would go out, the youngest one, and you know, spend the evening out, or you know, go and do things. And I couldn't sleep till he got back in. He wasn't like your teenager who wasn't home. It was a grown man who wasn't home. But he would take care of our needs when it came to making sure the house was safe and what have you, until one day he moved away from home. But that went on for a number of years. So that's where I am now, waiting for this case now that they have charged him with my rape and the rape of 26 other kids they had. Wow. And in 2017, those rape kits had to clear the shelves, and they had to get rid of them in the state of Florida. It was 13,000. And so mine had been there, and here I am today waiting, but I know where he is. And that's important.
Thank you, Gail. Gail, trauma is never forgotten, nor does it go away. Everyone's healing journey is so different, and you have built a life so far that you've put in so much work, healing. It's beautiful. You talked about how you were an educator and that you did pastoral service. What was the moment that you decided to take back your power?
One was moving out of my house into an apartment, and I felt very secure. I could drive my car into the garage and upstairs to the floor where I lived. And I just felt the security of it all. And I decided not to turn any lights on at night. Beautiful large windows and scenery, and sometimes you could see a light shining in. But that's when I decided I was not going to sleep in the dark, without cutting off the lights again. I was going to sleep in the dark and be secure. And that's what I did. When I wake up in the morning, the sun was out. I didn't have to get up all night and looking. And sometimes you build those habits. And when I realized that some of that was a habit, that I stopped. And when I thought about it, I said, no, because I'm fine. And that's when I decided to do that. That was part of it. Then when when I went to the police department and found out that I had later had a cold case, from that time on, I decided to fight it and to gather myself with those who were supporting it and put the bill through the legislators, and not just sit by, but also make the trip to Tallahassee every time it came before the legislators. And so I didn't miss a trip, except, well, I think one time I couldn't get up there. They wanted me like the next day. I said, that's not going to happen. I need some time to get up there. But nonetheless, and even that one, they did talk to me on the Zoom, and I watched it. But I fought it all the way until the House and the Senate passed it in Tallahassee. So that's when I I was decided that I was going to take it back.
That is so empowering,
Thank
Gail.
you.
That is so empowering. And you talk a lot about rape kits. You mentioned briefly about the hearing. Can you explain more about Gail's Law, what that entails, and what that means?
I can't take credit for myself. I told someone that I would put my name on that bill if it was going to help my community and help others. And so when when the law was passed, and I did find out before then what that kit would entail, it really became real life to me. On the boxes that they use, there would be a barcode, and the victims would get a copy of a barcode. That barcode was to be used, if they choose to look up their kit, to see where it is in the process. And I believe it's 30 days to have it tested. It must be tested by then. And going through, by 90 days, everything should be completed, as I understand it. It is now in phase 2 in the Tallahassee and the Panhandle area. It's finished phase 1, and it shall be here in phase 3 in Central Florida and South Florida in phase 3 in April, which is a good time because April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, so I'm excited about that. And so that's what the kit does and how it can be used. Now, it's not something that people may want to do, but if they decided years later that they do want to use it, all they need is that barcode. And that information is private, and even going on the site is not a site that is branded or identified, and so that other people can look up their information either.
Gail, thank you so much for being here today.
Welcome.
Thank you for sharing your story. You are truly a monumental change for sexual assault survivors, and just seeing the work that you've done and how you've healed and how you're helping others heal is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gail's healing journey has been incredible, and it's beautiful to see how she's taken her power back. In our next and final segment, we will be joined by Diana Oakley, who is also a sexual assault survivor. So stay with us. Diana Oakley is a sexual assault survivor, and she is here, ready, and willing to share her story and how she was able to take back her power after this traumatic situation. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Can you please share with us your story?
I was 17 years old, and I was kidnapped and sexually assaulted by a stranger. I was riding my bicycle, and he hit me with his pickup truck. He pulled over, and he pretended it was an accident and that he would take me to the hospital. And this happened in 1991. There were no cell phones then. It was in the country, so there were no houses nearby. So I believed him, and I allowed him to help me into his truck. But instead of taking me to the hospital, he drove me to the woods where he raped me and tried to kill me. Luckily, I escaped, and they arrested him 3 days later with the help of his wife.
Wow. You were 17 years old when that happened. How old were you when you decided to come forward and share your story?
Well, it took me 16 years. I mean, what happened to me was very public. It was on the news, so everybody knew what happened to me, but nobody talked to me about it. Not my friends, not my family. Back in 1991, nobody was talking about sexual assault. There were no rape crisis centers in my town. There were very few therapists that specialized in that. So I bottled all my pain up inside of me. I didn't know what to do. And it took me 16 years to finally be okay, be at a place in my life where I could start healing.
Wow. 16 years is a long time. And for 16 years, you were holding on to so much pain, grief, the internal struggle. And what's interesting is that the Victim Service Center, we actually did an internal study a little while back, and we found that it takes survivors 8 to 10 years before they're actually coming forward. Yours took 16 years. What empowered you? What gave you the courage to stand up, to say, this is not right, I'm telling my truth, and I'm sharing my story?
What gave me the power was in 2007, I read a book called Lucky by Alice Sebold. And Lucky's the true story of how Alice was sexually assaulted during her freshman year at college. And it was the first time I'd ever heard someone else describe how being raped made them feel. And it was the first time in 16 years that I did not feel completely alone. And it was Alice that inspired me to finally take that step and start dealing with it.
Wow. What has been the most impactful part of your journey so far, and how have you been showing up for yourself?
The most impactful part of my journey would have to be when I started attending support groups for women who have experienced sexual trauma. Before attending those groups, I always felt like I hadn't handled what happened to me as well as I could have. But after I started sharing my feelings with these women and hearing theirs, I realized that how I handled it was not as unusual as I thought. Like, we all had different stories, but we all had same fears and same phobias, and we all handled our trauma differently, but somewhat similarly at the same time. And just knowing that those women were out there, that there's no right way to handle trauma. Everybody handles it differently. There's no formula you can insert yourself into to get through it. It was just the important thing is that we were getting through it together.
After a sexual assault, after trauma, we often see that there is still this dynamic of power and control between the victim and the perpetrator. And oftentimes survivors, they start putting limits on themselves. So for example, not going out to social events, maybe in your case, not being in secluded areas, maybe like avoiding trucks, maybe not even going out at night to drink with your friends. Have you been putting limits on yourself, and how have you overcome these limits?
Oh, I put so many limits on myself. My assault impacted every aspect of my life. I was an extremely overprotective parent. I wouldn't let my kids do normal things like join groups, like Girl Scouts, sleep over at friends' houses. My fear of something traumatic happening to my children stopped them from living normal childhoods. I had severe intimacy issues in my marriage. It took me 21 years before I got back on a bicycle, because bicycles were a trigger for me. Pickup trucks were a trigger for me. Yeah, so many things.
When was the moment that you decided, I'm no longer letting this person have control over me. I'm no longer limiting myself. I'm the dictator of my own life. I take back power.
It was probably after reading that book, Lucky, Alice inspired me to start journaling because I was still too traumatized to talk about it. And as a young girl, I was a big journal keeper, so it felt natural to turn to writing. And I just made a promise to myself that no matter how hard it was, I was going to write down my story. And at first, all I was writing were phrases and words that were meaningful to me. But the more I wrote, the easier the words came. And eventually, I ended up publishing my own memoir that has gone on to inspire and help other people. And I feel like that's how I took back my power. Like, that is what inspired me. It's such a great feeling to take something that you thought had destroyed you and turn it into something beautiful.
And powerful at that.
Yes.
Journaling is a mindfulness technique. And are there any other mindfulness techniques that you do, like meditation or yoga?
Prayer. My faith played an enormous role in my healing, which was also not easy. A lot of spiritual people end up turning away from their faith when they experience trauma. They become angry with God. They don't understand why he would allow that to happen. And I myself was very angry with God for many years, but eventually I did turn back towards my faith, and I prayed every day for wisdom and strength. And so I guess it's like meditation, but prayer.
What is one piece of advice that you would give to survivors who are in their healing journey and they are ready to take back their power, but they may feel nervous and scared and stressed out? What is one thing that you would say to them?
I would say just don't give up. They don't have to continue to live this way with their fear. So many times you hear the past is the past and you need to move on, but I don't think you can truly move on if you don't address your past. If you don't know where to start, I would start by calling the Victim Service Center's hotline. It's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They got support groups. Join a support group. It doesn't matter if it happened 40 years ago or last night. There's people out there that can help you, and it's never too late to get help.
Thank you so much, Diana. Thank you for sharing your story. It was very heartfelt. I felt there's so many emotions there, and your healing journey so far has been beautiful. Like you said, trauma is never forgotten. It doesn't go away, and every day you are becoming someone who is better, and you are taking back your power. So it's beautiful to see.
Thank you.
Again, thanks to Diana and all our guests so much for being here today to talk about coping and support for all victims of trauma. If you would like to learn more about the Victim Service Center and our free services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. Call our office line at 407-254-9415 or call our crisis line at 407-500-HEAL. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear, and you are not alone.